Hi there, my name is Bob Judson and you're listening to Leading for Life Stories. I'm delighted you're here and I'm really glad to have you on my podcast, and I very, very much hope you enjoy it. Welcome back everyone, and welcome to episode 14. I'm hugely grateful if you're listening to these repeatedly, and very, very grateful for the feedback I'm getting from you because it's hugely useful to me and it's much appreciated. If you are enjoying them, please share widely and let other people know, because I think that's the way we'll get more listeners and more emphasis, and it'll allow me to grow the podcast, which is what I'm really trying to do with it. But for now, I just hope you enjoy this episode as much as the previous ones. I thought I'd do a bit of a follow-on this week from what I did last week with a personal story talking about going through the flying training system and onto operational flying in Germany. And this time what I wanted to do is kind of blend a little bit the personal story side with a bit of a theme. And I'm going to talk really about attention to detail as the theme through this, and the importance of that. And I think most people are aware, obviously it's important. It's important at varying times in terms of what you're doing. And sometimes it's more important than others. And that's true for everything I'm going to say too. But just an example really, or using some examples from what I did in the flying world particularly, to demonstrate the importance of it and how much difference it actually makes, and how much more efficient it can actually make you individually or collectively in an organization. What I was talking about last week, for those that listened, was flying the Jaguar in Germany on a frontline squadron as a young pilot on my first operational flying tour, and it was hugely demanding, very, very challenging world in all sorts of ways. From the weather in Germany, which was often quite difficult for the flying we were doing, through to the airplane itself, which was challenging to fly and demanding in terms of what we were trying to do with it, and to wring every ounce of capability out of it. We made it work pretty hard, and that made us work pretty hard in it. And importantly, of course, it was a single-seat airplane, the Jaguar, and it was a single-seat airplane with one cockpit, and it's a small cockpit. So there's not a lot of stuff you can take into the cockpit. So basically what you take in when you go flying on a typical sortie in an airplane like that is you take yourself with all the flying kit that you have, and obviously a lot of that's quite specialized in terms of what you need for survival and or the communications and anti-G protection to ensure that you resist the G-force that you're getting when you're pulling turns around corners. And you have a certain amount of material that you take. Your maps, if you're flying a sortie quite often, these days increasingly obviously digitized in the cockpit as well, and your navigation route is shown in the cockpit, so that's helpful. But also lots of other information that you need for other airfields. You have a thing called an en route supplement, which is basically a dictionary of all the airfields in the geography you're flying in, that will give you the frequencies to call them up on, the runway length, etc., just in case you need to divert and go and do those sorts of things. There's a bunch of paperwork that you do fly with routinely, but what you don't fly with is all of the stuff you really need that underpins what your core knowledge, if you like, of what you do. All the rules, the regulations, the aircraft manuals, the standard operating procedures we would operate to. These are things that you had to read and understand, and to a large extent commit to memory. And being aware of exactly what you could do, when you could do it, what you couldn't do, more importantly in some ways, what the airplane could do and how things responded, when you did certain things, how the systems worked. This was all stuff that you had to just build into your knowledge base and refer back to all of the time. And okay, you had, from the aircraft point of view, you had checklists, and you had typically two sort of checklists. You have a normal one, which basically covers all of the normal procedures, if you like, everything from the pre-start checks through starting it up and general operation of the airplane. And to be perfectly honest, most of the time you refer very, very little to that, because you get to know that really, really quickly and understand exactly what you should be doing and how you should be operating the airplane. You never, for example, get the checklist out to do the startup procedure if you're an operational frontline pilot. That's just not something you would need to do. But you have an emergencies checklist, and that obviously is much more important in many ways for when stuff goes wrong. And we would have two sort of sets of procedures for emergencies. Would have what are commonly known as bold-face drills, which would be the things you must know that you have to do before you get the checklist out. So, for example, if you had in a Jaguar, you had an engine fire, knowing the immediate action drills that you would have to carry out before you then thought about getting the checklist out was really important, because that was life-saving stuff and aeroplane-saving stuff. If you didn't do those things quickly, you didn't have time to get the checklist out and look for what the next steps were. But then actually there were always a sequence of things that we would turn around and have to go through and follow on some of the more complicated drills for some of the things like fuel problems or electrical problems, which can be quite insidious in airplanes and sometimes lead to real interesting challenges. So knowing where it was in the checklist, what you needed to look at, and paying attention to going through the checklist methodically and not skipping steps, and a bit like reading a recipe, I suppose, making sure you've actually looked at what you need to do, what the ingredients are, and then the method, and doing the method in the right order. That sort of stuff was really important. So all of those sorts of things were part of where I'm coming from on this attention to detail, but you needed to have a lot in your head and a lot of awareness of what you could do yourself, what you needed to draw on other resources for. But step back from that a little bit to just the whole of the sortie and the way we actually operated. Right from the moment you started planning, and typically on a sortie, we would fly a ground attack sortie with either 2 or 4 airplanes, doesn't make much difference. We would start the cycle for a sortie 2 hours before you took off. And you'd have an hour that you planned, and then you'd have half an hour briefing, and then you'd have half an hour, which was the walk time to go to the airplane. So that's literally to step out and go and sign for the airplane, get into it, start it up and get out to the end of the runway. And that would be all planned against a takeoff time. And more importantly, that would then often be planned against a time on target time. And that drove everything. And the timing and the accuracy of the timing, I sort of alluded to this in the previous podcast, was absolute. We would work everything to plus or minus 5 seconds, but actually we would be really disappointed if we were outside probably plus or minus a couple of seconds, on a target. And you would aim to be precisely on time to the second, hitting your target from the time that you'd actually work back right from the start. That would drive the time you took off, and obviously drive, therefore, the time you started planning. And so it was a very efficient system that you needed to make sure you understood your role. Everybody in a 4-aircraft formation, everybody had specific roles in terms of the planning. We all had a list of things that we would do. Somebody would be doing the target planning. Somebody would be doing the route planning. Somebody would be putting the planning into the automated system that then loads into the airplane. And in those days, obviously, we used a lot of paper maps. Now it's much more an automated computer-based system that you would typically plan everything on. And that's helpful in some ways, but it still requires detail, attention to detail. And obviously, you're aiming to hit quite often small targets. So the aim of the game was to 100% make sure you found that target and you were able to get your weapons onto that target or photograph it if you're doing reconnaissance in the best possible way. So having a clear understanding of exactly what that looked like, exactly what you're aiming for, what sort of features would lead you into that, was really important. And we used basically 2 types of maps in the main. We used a 500,000 scale map, so quite a large scale map for our route planning, where a minute on that would be, roughly speaking, about an inch in terms of 2.5 centimeters or so of physical distance on the map, because you're flying everywhere at 450 knots. And then you'd use, for the target planning, you'd use a 1 to 50,000 scale map. Now that's an ordnance survey map, just like for those in the UK that you'd go walking with, and you'd use as a route planning map. So with kilometer squares on it, and 10 seconds on that is quite a chunky piece of the map. And so you would have a target route that would typically be from an initial point, which will be a big feature that we're aiming to find, to then get ourselves navigating down the map, literally physically map reading in those days, to take you down the map to get to the target, and looking at all the features and where they should be and what time you should actually be passing those features was a key element of success here. And then obviously the aim of that was to finally get you to a point where you're going big to smaller to smaller to smaller to target, and that you're actually going to be able to see your target as early as possible, because it wasn't any good seeing the target as you flew right over the top of it. You needed to see it in time to be able to get your weapon solution onto it, or to make sure that you're in the right place to photograph it well. And again, that attention to detail element was crucial. Knowing the features and how the map, translating the map from a flat paper map into a three-dimensional picture in your head, so you could actually envisage, right, where am I going to be able to see this? Where are the contour lines? Is the target going to be on the front side of a hill, which I want it to be, or if I planned it on the back side of a hill, I'm going to see it really, really late because I'm flying over the top of the hill to get to it. And all of this is before you start thinking about the tactics and avoiding threat things, avoiding things that might expose you unnecessarily, put you too much above radar. So we'd always try and use the terrain to best effect. If we could fly down valleys towards targets, that would be absolutely optimal, and the same on the route. And you had to plan that you were going to actually be facing threat airplanes and other things as well. So there was a hell of a lot going on in that process, that's for sure. And it was under time pressure. As I said, we typically had an hour to plan. And the reason we limited it to an hour is because NATO standards at the time for what we were required to do only gave us an hour. So we had to be able to plan a 4-ship formation, a 4-aircraft formation with a full attack plan in an hour. And that took some effort, but it with practice, you got really, really good at it. You knew exactly what was going to happen. Then you stepped into the brief, and the brief would cover everything from literally the startup taxi takeoff procedure, which was pretty standard, but would occasionally have some variation, through having started very much at the beginning with a time hack, a make sure everyone is synchronized watches. Literally, we're all on the right time, and we know exactly what time it is. And you'd then go through the plan and the routing plan, the target plan, particularly if there were any tactics involved around the target, how we were going to deal with threats, etc. And then ultimately coming back to the base and how we were going to recover and bring everybody home. And we'll talk about emergencies a bit. We'll talk about fuel planning a fair bit to make sure we obviously had a very clear view of everything that should be going on before you left the brief and stepped out to go and walk to the airplane. Then you got changed. Typically, you'd go and put your flying kit on, and that would be obviously be in a flying suit generally for the plan. But then certainly in the UK, at any time for probably 6 months of the year, mostly at least, you're flying in an immersion suit, so a dry suit that's going to keep you alive if you go into the sea, with extra kit underneath that to keep you warm, to suitably insulated. And obviously all of your anti-G equipment and your helmet, et cetera, all of that needed to be put on. Go out to the airplane, get in the airplane, get on with getting through your own startup procedure. Quite often would have a spare aircraft. So if yours for some reason was unserviceable, then you'd have to run to try and get the spare, and you'd try very hard to keep that, do all of that in the time and still be ready to go at takeoff time. And at a given moment, we would have a check-in time. That would be a nominated minute where we would check the formation in, and we'll go through a sequence of checking radios and things, and then go to air traffic and would taxi out and ultimately then launch. All of that, again, still focused on time. Time was everything in all of this. And then you'd run round the route, and on the route, things were happening quickly. You're going at nearly 500 miles an hour. You're flying in a formation of 4 airplanes. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. Your aim would be to be what we called on track, on time. So literally on the route you should be on and on time. Obviously, sometimes stuff got in the way. Weather changed, for example, and forced us to reroute around the weather, or even turn back from the weather. Would occasionally, and in fact very frequently in that environment, would operate with a threat aeroplane, so-called a bounce, or indeed other fighters. So from another squadron or even another air force many times, would actually operate against genuine threat aircraft that were coming in and trying to simulated shoot us down. And so you'd have to work to defeat those and still make it to the target. And we had lots of tactics and ways of doing that, mostly which were successful, but obviously occasionally they weren't. And in those days, as I sort of alluded to when I spoke initially about flying the Jaguar in Germany, the automatics in the airplane were good when they worked, but a lot of the time they didn't. And the navigation system in particular was pretty unreliable and would often fail. And because it so often failed, there was no real excuse for the nav system has failed, therefore I can't make it to the target. I'm going to have to turn back and go home. the absolute expectation was you're still going to make it to the target, and you're going to be on time, and you're going to hit the target with a weapon solution, reversionary weapon solution in that case, because your primary computed system is not working for you. And that took practice, obviously, to be good at all of those things. But it also took a lot of attention to detail in things like the map study. I alluded to a very near miss I had in the previous podcast when I nearly hit a big transmission mast on a check ride. What I didn't say at the time when I was talking about that was that actually the mast, which was clearly marked on the map, but I say clearly marked on the map, it was overlaid. The marking on the map was overlaid by another marking for the edge of an air traffic zone that we were close to at the time with that particular target. And so it obscured partly the mast. No excuse for not seeing it. And one of the big things I actually learned from that was how important it really was to study the maps and be very, very clear about what the route was, where we were going, what features would see, what time would be expected to be there. I touched on this when I talked about the nuclear strike role that we had as well, where if we were sitting on quick reaction alert, we had real targets in the Warsaw Pact that we would be dedicated against if we'd ever launched on QRA. And we used to route study those targets to death. We would would be tested on it. We'd absolutely be expected to know exactly what we were going to see along the way, where we were routing to, obviously all the detail around the target itself and what we were expected to see. So map study and have a real clear understanding of that in advance was hugely important. And continues to be to this day. And you'll still see frontline pilots. They'll tell you it's really important. It's not good enough just to follow the green writing and hope it's going to get you there. So the green writing in the head-up display that's going to direct you to the target and put usually a cross or a weapon aiming symbol on the target itself. You've got to be able to find it without that all working for you, and make sure that the system is delivering what you're hoping it's going to. In which case, happy days. You arrive with a nice green cross or a weapon symbol right on the target as you're expecting it to be there. But if it's not there, then you need to know where it should be and how you're going to get yourself onto that and get a solution. Through the target, hitting the target, hopefully, returning safely to base, recovering, landing. Sortie's never over until you've shut down at the end of it. And then coming back in at the far end of the sortie, remembering what happened, because the next thing you're going to do is get changed back out of the flying kit and go back in, grab a cup of coffee, and then fairly short order after that, you're going to have a debrief. And that debrief would typically be another half an hour session, and you'd go through every aspect of the sortie. And in particular, where things had not gone to plan, you'd dive into those in some detail, and you'd look specifically at things like the target and whether we'd all hit the target, whether we'd hit the target on time. If we hadn't hit the target on time, what time had we hit it? Was it an alternate time? Had something gone wrong? Had we missed completely? And occasionally, obviously, that did happen as well. What we'd done in response to threat aircraft, sometimes those would be with us in the debrief, and we'd get a real insight from them as to what they'd seen, how they'd seen our tactics work or not work, and what they'd actually done. And a huge amount of things happening in that debrief as well. It was really important part of the process. Now I'll talk more about how I think there's some translation from some of that into the commercial world, because I just don't think it's something that commercial world does very well. But it was massively beneficial because you really did learn from the mistakes that had been made, or not even when it wasn't mistakes, just improving, working on continual improvement. And a lot of that was about detail. It was about understanding what had happened, why it had happened, thinking it through in your own mind, and then being honest about it as well. Remember, it's single seat world. You're in a single cockpit airplane, just you. There are lots of mistakes that you could potentially make, or minor things you could do, or things that could be improved, that it was up to you and absolutely expected of you that you were going to be honest about those. You were going to front those up in the debrief, because if it improves the way that you can fly and others can fly, and they can learn from things that have happened to you, then that's enormously beneficial. It was particularly important in the sense that we had absolutely no rank in any of those debriefs, or indeed the sorties generally. So if the boss of the squadron was there, or even the station commander was there, or when I was the boss of a squadron or the station commander, I would absolutely be expected to be just as honest and take just as much of a critique from the formation leader as I would have been when I was a junior pilot. There was no difference at all. And obviously it gives huge credibility, I suppose, to the leadership where they are honest and genuinely prepared to own up to to mistakes and pass on their experiences so other people can benefit from them. So why do I say all of that? Because I think the importance of this attention to detail thing, I hope I've kind of brought that out a little bit, that just how the whole thing only worked if you really did have a grip of the detail, a focus on it right from square one in terms of knowing everything you needed to know in advance, and then during the execution of a sortie as well. If you translate it forward into more senior roles, and some of this is probably more applicable into the business space, then there's obviously a time when you want to be all over the detail and when you are expected to be all over the detail, but it can't be all of the time. The more senior you get, the more stuff there is going on. You cannot possibly have a total grip on absolutely everything that is going on in the organization all of the time. What you need to know is you need to know your strengths, and you need to play to those strengths. And you also need to know who in the team you can rely on, and knowing also when you can't necessarily rely on somebody to turn around and do something, and you have to turn around and take a more critical approach to looking at what they do. So you're actually getting you're keeping a closer eye on them than you would with someone who you completely trust, who you know can just get on and deliver for you. But equally, some of the time you'll be in meetings, or you'll be in other fora, you'll be on a public stage where you absolutely are expected to be on top of the detail, or at least to a reasonable degree. I think it's some of the time you see it in radio and TV interviews where politicians, I think, are put horribly on the spot sometimes about detail that in some instances it is absolutely reasonable, they should know it. In some instances, I think it's entirely unreasonable, the pressure they're put under. But the point being is you need to have a view of what is important and what is perhaps less important, and being aware of how you can translate that into success, whatever you are doing, whether that in my instance was flying airplanes out in Germany, or if you're actually in the corporate environment and you're looking at what's what you need to do to succeed. If you're a senior leader in a corporate organization, then being in a position where you have enough knowledge and enough experience to fall back on that's going to help you avoid being right in the detail all of the time, to trust and empower the people that work for you so that they are all on top of the detail and they can bring it to you when you need it. That's a good place to be. I think if you try and be completely buried in the detail all of the time, you will swamp yourself. And you've probably all seen types of leader like this where they are too much on the detail. It's unhelpful to people who are working and feeling they're being micromanaged as a direct result. You don't want that to happen. But at the same time, you do need to know as the leader that you've got a successful plan and is being successfully executed, and so therefore there is a reasonable expectation, I think, on you as a leader, and a reasonable expectation from your subordinates, or they should be in a position where they're expecting you to appropriately challenge. And if they can't answer the questions when you challenge them about the detail, then ultimately you can call them to account. Going back to a flying example, I talked about emergencies and boldface drills for emergencies. We used to get tested on that, and it would be a written sheet, and you had to go through all of the boldface drills for the airplane and make sure you had them right. And if you didn't have them right, then you would be absolutely called to account in terms of expectation of what was going to happen to you. So I think it's whatever level you're at, whatever business you're in, it's being aware of what's really important, when is it important, and what should I be really paying attention to. That's the message I kind of want to leave you with. I think it's very easy to think you've got to know everything all the time. That's not true. It's equally unreasonable to turn around and say, right, I'm in a senior position now, I don't need to know this stuff, I've got other people that look after that. That might be partially true, but when it goes wrong, how are you going to correct it? And how are you going to understand what's gone wrong if you're not enough in the detail to actually be aware of how it should have worked, and to then turn around and take some corrective action? And how can you lead? How can you mentor appropriately if you don't have a proper grip on the detail to be able to turn around and show that you really know what you're talking about. Now, obviously, in a very big organization, there will be people who are doing jobs that you have no skill base in at all, and you are heavily reliant on them. And they need to then know that. They need to be clear that you are not the expert at this. You're relying on them for this, 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 and this. This is what you expect from them. You want them to brief you on things that are really important in that area or things that are going wrong. And you want them to bring you that brief in a way that you can understand it. Because it's no good at all somebody coming up to you with a hugely technical point that is just double Dutch to you. You need to obviously be in a position where they can explain it. And if they can't explain it, you need to drill into it further until you properly understand it. Because only then can you really feel you're competently on top of the organization. If I look at some of my more senior roles in that regard, when I was a station commander at Royal Air Force Coningsby running the Typhoon Force, I obviously had every department on the station working for me. I was clearly not an expert in any way, shape or form on lots of those areas. I wasn't a supply officer. I wasn't an air traffic controller. I wasn't an engineer. So all of the real detailed specializations within those, I would absolutely be reliant on other people to deliver for me. But I needed to know enough to be able to ask intelligent questions, to be able to be an intelligent leader on top of that, and to make them feel that they had to be on their game and they couldn't coast. I wanted to make sure they knew that I was really interested in what they did, which I obviously was, but also to actually make sure that they felt that they couldn't kind of just cruise along and feel that the boss doesn't really care about this. And I think if you are the leader of an organization and you don't pay enough attention to every element of the structure you're responsible for, then you're not doing your job well, in my view. I think you need to be showing that you care, showing that you have an interest, showing that it's a whole team endeavor. I talked about flying, and it was a team thing that was bringing together that 4-ship formation. That is just a microcosm of a bigger thing. If you take it to the station level for the Air Force, where actually the whole station is ultimately what gets the pilots into the airplanes and into the air, the pilot is only the manifestation of the end result of what actually happens on that unit. That's true with just about every organization. There's an end result, but there's a very, very big team that's underpinning all of that pulls it together. And if you're leading that team, then making sure that they know what they're doing, what their responsibilities are, understanding what the end product is that they're working for as well is important. And particularly if you've got an organization that has got a frontline aspect that is remote from where some of the team are, try and find a way to turn around and get them aware enough of what's going on at the front line. Go and visit it. Go and see the shop floor, as it were, to make sure they really appreciate, right, this is your part in this big machine. This is what you're doing. And I hope you then get a better perspective as a result of knowing that you then take back to your workplace and gives you more pride in what you're doing and more emphasis on all of that. Hey, I really hope that's useful to you. I think I wanted to talk about it because I was kind of conscious that I talked quickly through what I was doing in terms of frontline squadron flying last week and didn't go into very much detail at all. And I could clearly spend hours and hours talking about this stuff. But equally, I don't want to bore you to death. So if that's useful, and please do let me know. Send me some feedback, and I'll clearly do a few more of these kind of personal stories linked into some thematic stuff as well, because I think that's hopefully of value to you as well as being of interest to you too. So that's it for this week. I'm very, very grateful as always for your attention and for you listening. Thank you very much indeed for that. As I mentioned at the top, then please do review, subscribe if you haven't already done that. And most importantly, share, tell your friends, and let them have sight of this, because if they think it's useful and I get more listeners as a result, then that will be a great outcome. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.